Hey all, my name is Ramesh Duresamy. I'm a Microsoft Certified Solution Architect. So in this video, we are going to see what is Kubernetes and what are the benefits or advantages of using Kubernetes, and how can we create an AKS cluster in the Azure portal. Okay, so these are the three things that we are going to just uh, see in this video. So first of all, coming to the first question, so what is Kubernetes? So as you guys know, like predominantly in the market nowadays, people talk more about Kubernetes, right? So what are the benefits that we get? So what is Kubernetes first? It is a container orchestration tool which is used for deployment, for scaling, and for management of the containers that's being deployed in it. Okay, so it is an orchestration tool. So what are the benefits that you get from an Kubernetes? So the benefits are something, you get a lot of automation and, easy scalability, and deployment of the application becomes very simple when it's being, containerized. So the containerization is becoming predominantly more in the market. So people are moving from monolithic application to an, microservices architecture. So that's the reason, the Kubernetes uh, word is predominantly dominant in the market. Next, it is Kubernetes is also an open source tool, right? So it has been provided as a service in Azure, right? So in Azure, the Kubernetes master node is taken care by the Azure itself, and the worker nodes or the node pools are taken care by the customer, right? So let's get into the Azure portal. So try to create an free account and just try to have some hands-on with the creation of the service. Okay, just go to the Kubernetes service and try to create the service. Create a Kubernetes cluster. So when you come, there are a lot of tabs which is available, like we have node pools, access, networking, integrations, advanced tags, review and create. Okay, so we will go one by one. First, it needs to be deployed inside a resource group. So I just go ahead and create a resource group. Cluster details. So we have different formats if you wanted to go with the standard or dev test, cost optimized, or batch processing for heavy computing, right? So it depends upon the customer which uh, cluster they wanted to go with. Okay, so for time being, I will go with the dev test and create your cluster name. I'll give my cluster name as demo cluster. And the same way you need to select your region. I'm just giving it as East US, and the availability zones. So availability zones, it's something like you have, 3 data centers. Suppose if you wanted to have some high availability, you can go with 1, 2, or 3. So for this is a demo. So I don't want to go with any of the availability zones. I'm just going with none. But in the production workload, you will have, 3 or 2, depends upon the requirement and the Kubernetes version. You have different versions of Kubernetes available. So you have, the updated version is 1.24.0. So that is in preview. So probably you can go ahead with the default. And the API server availability. You can select if you need 99.9% or 99.5% availability of the API server. I am just going with the default. And then comes the primary node pool. So you will have your node size. You have, standard SKU B4MS, which is 4 CPUs and 16 GB memory. In case if you don't want, or if you want more SKUs, then you can go and change the SKUs, right? You could see there are a lot of SKUs, D series, A series, and B series VMs or virtual machine sets which is provided there. So you can select it based on the selection of the SKUs, you will be charged. So I'm just going with the default one. And scale method, if you wanted to scale the cluster automatically or manual, you can select, but predominantly people goes with the auto scaling. And how many, so what is the node count range that you need? Okay, so I'm just, you have 1 to 5, I've just given 1. So the maximum node count you have selected is higher than the remaining quota for the subscription. Auto scaling may fail for about 2 nodes, so I just give as 2. I don't want a 5. Okay, I just go to the next. So next it creates the node pool. Okay, so you can see the agent pool, and this is the node size that we have selected, and it takes by default, Linux operating system. And if you see you want to enable virtual nodes, you can enable it, but still this is not necessary. Then coming to the disk encryption, the node pool operating system disk encryption, it goes with the encryption type is of 2 different kinds. So one is encryption with platform managed key, and encryption at rest with customer managed keys. Okay, so if someone doesn't want it to go with the Microsoft managed key, okay, you can go ahead and create your own keys for the encryption, which is at rest. When the data is residing on the node, it gets automatically, encrypted. Next, coming to the access, you have resource identity, system assigned managed identity. We'll go with the default Kubernetes authentication and authorization. So we have all rollback access controls as enabled. So we'll go with that. And coming to the networking, so this is the main part, uh, which talks to the pods or nodes, which is inside the cluster. So in the network configuration, you have a Kubenet and Azure CNI. Okay, so Kubenet, if you select Kubenet, it creates a new VNet for your cluster using the default values. Okay, you don't provide any of the VNet names or the subnet names. Okay, it by default creates its own VNet. So you can even go with Azure Container Instance, which is the CNI, Azure Container Instances. So when you go ahead with the container instances, it creates an virtual network, or in case if you have any of the existing VNets, you can map the existing virtual network to the container instance. So that's the benefit you get when you go with a CNI, Container Network Interface, and you can select your subnet and your Kubernetes service address range. So this is the number of IPs that's being provided for you inside the Kubernetes. Okay, and this is going to be your DNS service IP and the Docker bridge address. So this Docker bridge address, which gets generated automatically. So we will not be predominantly using the Docker bridge address in the Kubernetes cluster, but still, why this is required by default, it takes this bridge address. Why would we need this Docker bridge addresses? In case we wanted to build any image inside the cluster, then the Docker would require an IP address to build your images. Okay, instead of it going and taking the IP address from the cluster subnet, it picks up from the Docker bridge address itself. So there won't be any confusion between the IP ranges for the Docker bridge and the cluster subnet. So that is the reason, Docker bridge address is created. And you have domain name server prefix and a traffic routing. In case if you want to go with the standard load balancer, you can go with it. And security, you wanted to create a private cluster, you can enable it as a private cluster. Certain organization, they wanted to have an private cluster. And coming to network policy, I'm just going with none. So I'm just going with the next tab is the integrations. You have your Kubernetes cluster. So if you wanted to map with any container registries, okay, so Azure Container Registry is one of the repositories where you can have all your images mapped to your Azure Container Registry, and you can reference your container registry to the Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so currently I don't have any container registries created, but still, your images will be picked up from this container registry. In case if there is any check-in or any, push happens to the container registry, automatically builds the image. And coming to the monitoring is, I'm just disabling the Azure monitor and Azure policy as well. The next is enable secret store CSI driver. So this is not required as of now. And in case if you wanted to map any tags to your Kubernetes cluster, you can map your tags and then go ahead. You can just review it. So let me start create it. So the creation, probably it would take around 1 or 2 minutes of time. Let's wait for a minute and see the deployment process has started. So when we click on the submit, it checks the the Azure Resource Manager, and it starts deploying the ARM. At the back end, it's all the ARM template. Okay, the Azure Resource Manager, it gets deployed, it gets validated and gets deployed into the server. So once you create this, you will have your VNet created, and then you will have your subnet created, and then you will have your cluster, which is the AKS cluster being created. Let's hold on for a moment. Let us go and see the resource group. I'll just get into the subscription and go into my resource groups. So my new resource group is created. So I could see the VNet is created, and this is our cluster. Okay, the cluster is also created, right? So let's get into the VNet. So this is our address space, and this is our DNS server names, and we can see the subnets as well. So this is our default subnet. It has more than 10,000 IP address. So the same way, when you create your subnets, you need to ensure what is the IP range that you're going to use. It is going to be IPv4 or IPv6. Okay, so if it is IPv4, the IP range is going to be 2 power 32, which is the CIDR notation for IPv4. If you go for IPv6, it's going to be 2 power 64. That is the CIDR notation for IPv4. Okay, so you need to predominantly identify like which IP Internet Protocol version that you're going to utilize for the creation of the Kubernetes cluster. So let me get into the cluster. Yep. So you could see the Kubernetes version here and your resource group. So you have created one node pool. So what is your network type plugin? This is the Azure Container Interface. Okay. So all the pods or nodes which consume or the containers, right, will consume the IPs from this VNet via the container network interface. So this is one of the, um, uh, most uh, important context, I would say. So you could see the Kubernetes service and then the node pools and your networking. So what is your service CIDR and your DNS service IP? What is your Docker bridge CIDR? Everything you can see here. Okay, let us try to connect to the cluster using the command line CI. Okay, so let us go to the command prompt. PowerShell. So I think it is trying to create an storage account to mount. Okay, so if you could see here, if you click on connect, you will see the connection commands here. So you need to set your account first, your subscription account. So account set dash dash subscription and then your subscription ID. It gets mapped and you get the credentials, the config file of the Kubernetes to your local, and then you can get the deployments. So you could see here, these are the default deployments under the kube system namespace. Okay, let's see what are the nodes. Kubectl get nodes. So we have 2 nodes. Let's see, do we have any pods running? Because there should not be ultimately any pods because we have not deployed anything. I'm just checking with all the namespaces. So these pods are related to the kube system, which is related to the Kubernetes management services. Okay. So you have the cloud manager or DNIS, the Azure disk, and some proxy. Okay, so these are related to the kube system. So this is how we create your Kubernetes cluster and we connect it via the bash or PowerShell scripts and run your kubectl commands. Right. So let's come here. Okay. So this is how you create your Kubernetes cluster. So you need to understand, right? So when you create, whether you want to go with Kubenet or container and networking interfaces. Okay, so these two are predominantly most important, and all those IP ranges which is going to be utilized for the pods will be consumed from the VNet address ranges. Okay, via the container network interface. So this is how you create an AKS cluster and you connect to the AKS cluster and you just go ahead and utilize your kubectl commands, right? I think the video was useful. Please try to like and subscribe. Thank you.